I actually don't keep my emergency fund in a high yield savings account. Yeah.
What?
I know. Welcome to the Sunday Reset. I'm Jen.
And I'm Jill, and this week we are sharing a fun new series, some very meal preppable meals, and answering a listener question about whether sustainability and shopping sustainably is a waste of money.
Yes. So let's get into our first weekly money move. So we decided instead of just sharing random money moves, we wanted to create something that was systematic that you could follow. And so we have started to release every Monday a new money move, which is a checkup that you can do to organize or get on top of your finances. And so we're releasing those every Monday morning on Instagram. And if you're in the friend letter, the link is in the description if you're not. But if you get our friend letter, which is our newsletter, we're sending that to you every Monday morning. So you know what to do to stay on top of your money for the week. And if you're on Instagram, you can actually follow at Weekly Money Move. We wanted to have a place where all the money moves were organized in one place outside of our Frugal Friends Podcast Instagram, so you could just neatly see them when you need to check. If you miss a week, then you can see them all right there.
And this week's money move is doing an emergency fund check. So if you don't know what an emergency fund is, you can hop over to that Instagram account that Jen just mentioned at Weekly Money Move, where we talk a little bit more about what an emergency fund is. But that's what we're doing today. So how did your check go?
Yeah, so I did my emergency fund check, and this is something that I wouldn't share on Instagram or on the show regularly. Or maybe I have mentioned it on the show regularly, but we always say keep your first thing to do is keep your emergency fund in a high yield savings account. And we'll link to our favorite one in the description below. Mm-hmm. But I actually don't keep my emergency fund in a high yield savings account. Yeah.
What?
I know.
I don't think I even knew this.
Okay, yeah. Don't do what I do, okay? I started this a long time ago when I
Do I need to stop recording?
No. When I thought I knew better, when I was like super into optimizing everything, I opened a traditional brokerage and put my emergency fund in the brokerage. So my emergency fund is invested. And that is a bad idea for two reasons. The first is you don't know when you will need the money. Mm-hmm. So A, it can take 3 days to get to you. Mm-hmm. B, and this is even bigger, if the market is down mm-hmm. when you need it, then you are losing money when you have no choice, which did happen to me. So I needed money back in 2022 out of my emergency fund, and the market was down and I had lost money. And so since 2022, it's been building back up, and it has built back up.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I haven't needed it, and I haven't needed to put more money into it either. So take my example and listen to what I should have done and just put it in a high yield savings account, not a brokerage. And should I take it out? Yes, I absolutely should. Have I? No, because now I'm too invested. And
literally and figuratively.
But I did do an amount check, and we do have 4 to 5 months of expenses, and that's good for us. And that is where we are at.
Okay.
So
I'm listening and I'm not judging.
Thank you.
I love the vulnerability. This is just what feels good for you. Like you're willing to take that risk to not have it accessible. And okay. It's a choice.
Yeah. And 4 to 5 is a little conservative, especially for being self-employed. We talk about in the friend letter and the Weekly Money Move Instagram post how to determine how much to have in your emergency fund. And while 4 to 5 is a little conservative for somebody who's self-employed, it is still okay because I know I could go out and get freelance work, mm-hmm. Freelance writing, if I really needed to increase my income. Okay. So there's a little bit of like security there.
Well, okay.
Yeah, how about you?
Well, do as I do and as I say. I do have my emergency fund in a high yield savings account, so it is earning currently about 4% annually. And it's also super accessible to me. And I love keeping it there. That feels safe and good for me. I have about 3 to 4 months worth of living expenses in my emergency fund. However, I'm also a little bit extra nutty, and this is where it enters into me defining what is enough. But apart from an emergency fund, which I view for us as money available to us if we lose our jobs, one or both of us, hopefully not both of us, but if it happens, that's kind of what that's there for. I also have money earmarked for home repairs and maintenance and medical deductible. So if you kind of tally all of that up, then, it would represent more than more than 3 to 4 months. But I earmark it for these separate purposes and keep it all into a high yield savings account and track it all in a spreadsheet. If I need to pull from the home maintenance bucket or the medical bucket, then I'm able to do that and then make a plan to kind of refill it. But all of that money is able to earn interest in that high yield savings account, which again, we have our favorite linked in the show notes below.
Yeah. It's definitely hard to get a grasp on how much you should have in your emergency fund.
Yeah.
Like you can have 3 different considerations for your emergency fund, or just the job loss one like a lot of people do. Ultimately, do what feels right to you, what feels safe, and it's meant to take away that financial anxiety of not knowing if you can pay for something. And if you haven't saved enough to where you don't have that anxiety, then maybe you need a little bit more. But there is a point where it gets to where you just have too much cash saved and you need to put it in investments.
Yeah.
And there's a fear element.
I finally am to that place. I was able to define my enough. I think we had a conversation on the podcast. We interviewed somebody about emergency funds, and they were talking specifically insurances. And I liked that metric of what are your insurance deductibles? And so for us, having a deductible for our home insurance, our medical, wanting to make sure I had that. And for me personally, also preparing for what if we had an emergency medical experience and job loss. They can go hand in hand. And so being prepared for both of those, especially for, myself being self-employed and so wanting to really hedge these things. But once I was able to identify if I have this, this, and this saved up, then I'm ready to go even harder at investing in retirement. So I am at that stage now, which I'm so thrilled for.
I would say anything more than 9 months of expenses, then go into investing. And you can even put it in a Roth IRA where your contributions can be pulled out if you're worried about safety. So that's it. All right.
Cool.
Meal plans.
All right. This week was some of my favorites. And again, sharing some super easy recipes. We know we're all tired and we just want something that's going to be pretty low effort, low energy, but tasty. It's got to taste good. So one of my favorite is this beef and rice bowl, and have the recipe linked below as well. So it's just essentially making rice and this kind of beef stir fry, but there's not many ingredients. And I'll say if you don't have the mirin or even certain types of the amino acids, then you can sub those things out for other stuff. I think there's many times where I only make this with just red pepper flakes, soy sauce, and brown sugar, and done. It really doesn't need too much to be tasty.
Yeah, so. I think hoisin or some of those teriyakis, it's just soy sauce and sugar.
Yeah.
You can really make anything you want with just some soy sauce and sugar.
This one's a crowd pleaser. I will also make this a lot of times. So as you know, Eric and I don't have children, but we host a lot of people with their kids in our home. And this is a go-to one for me when there's kids coming in town. And the children seem to often enjoy this one. So there you have it if you got kids. And then usually, so if I make the Korean beef and rice, I will make sure that I make extra rice so that I at least have rice left over. There's usually not any meat left over because that stuff's so yummy. But extra rice, the next day I'll make a fried rice with. And I linked the recipe that I use, but this recipe uses fresh veggies. I always just use a frozen bag of veggies.
Oh, yeah.
And it works just as fine and it cuts the time down. So rather than all of the time that they're recommending you take with the different vegetables that you're throwing in at different points in the cooking process, just cook up all the frozen veggies at once as the bag directs. Then keep going with the rest of the fried rice recipe. This one's also a crowd pleaser. So you got 2 bangers back to back. People love it.
A week of bangers.
Yeah. And then with whatever you happen to have left over from these 2 meals, an egg wrap roll up. No, this is
Egg roll
I'm
wraps.
sorry, egg roll. It's a whole mouthful. Egg roll up, not an egg wrap.
The
roll.
URL says egg roll wraps.
Yes.
So it could be either.
Yeah. So this one, you can use some of your leftovers, but it's more kind of going for like breakfast for breakfast or breakfast for lunch and dinner. I really love to batch prepare something that is kind of egg based, something that's grab and go. So these egg roll-ups are really great for that. And it does kind of have some Asian ingredient tie-ins so that you can kind of have ingredient overlap with this. So it was a good week.
Yeah. I had a really good week too.
Yeah.
So I made a cottage cheese lasagna.
Ooh.
Yeah. So instead of using ricotta, we used cottage cheese to amp up the protein, and it was so good.
Cool.
I did not miss the other cheese. So there was still some Parmesan, still some low-fat mozzarella. Really, really good.
Yeah.
I rarely make lasagna because I find it so cumbersome, but this was really easy. Next, I made Greek chicken bowls, and this is one of my favorites because it's very easy. I get a can of Kalamata olives, Greek olives, a can of artichokes, and some tzatziki, some hummus, and I use those as like dips throughout the week with my almond crackers. But put on salad, toppings. You can use chicken breast or chicken thighs. I use chicken thighs. All the spices. It's just so good. Yeah. And I make my own Greek dressing. I didn't link to the dressing, but she has a Greek dressing recipe that I use.
Yeah.
And then my last one is a crowd pleaser. 1-pan chicken sausage and orzo.
Ooh.
So
you love the 1-pans.
I do. I love them. So this one, I will say caveat. She says use 2 cups of orzo. It's too much orzo. 1 cup. 1 cup of orzo. But everything else as written, love it. So creamy. And I use the leftover Parmesan from the lasagna.
Okay.
In this one. So I use up all of my Parmesan and even top it with a little bit of the leftover mozzarella. Didn't call for it, but had it left over.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it sounds like for you too, there was some ingredient overlap, kind of a little bit more of a chicken week and easy, super preppable.
And in the lasagna, I use ground turkey instead of ground beef.
Oh, nice.
I find I've been preferring ground turkey in my pasta dishes versus ground beef.
Yeah.
It's very tender.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I recently made a spaghetti with ground turkey, and it was so good.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to try it.
All right, friends, let's get to a listener question. This one comes from Jay Fox, and they say, can you speak to when you have 2 values? How to decide what to spend, where to buy? I'm thinking of the value of environmental friendly spending that sometimes feels like the less frugal option. buying less, buying used, really hit the mark on being frugal and making environmentally friendly choices. But what about when you buy new? This is often a time you could buy from the cheaper source, the source that uses more plastic. And I've been trying to figure out how better to decide my values in this area. So, for example, I bought new bed sheets and I bought 100% organic cotton from the smaller brand. Do they feel any different? I don't think so. Am I making an impact by doing something like that? Or did I just waste money?
What a good question. So I think the core of this question is, are frugality and sustainability two different values? And you touched on the fact that, yes, buying secondhand is both environmentally friendly and frugal, right? But like, what about when I'm buying more, like buying new?
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth it to buy those things sustainably, or am I just wasting money? So I think right off the bat, frugality and sustainability are, I would say, the same values, because frugality is good stewardship of
Mm-hmm.
resources. Our resources include money, and they also include the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the same. I would say spending as little as possible and sustainability, those are two different values.
Exactly. And there's also something called greenwashing that we have to be aware of. I'm sure many of you have heard this term before, and it's kind of when we see something that is being advertised to us as being super eco-friendly, but it might not actually be that sustainable. We found this article that we're also linking in the show notes called, or it comes from Greener Ideal, and it's talking all about greenwashing. And they list out a couple of things that we can be aware of, some common greenwashing tactics. And they include things like vague or misleading terms. So, calling things eco friendly or all natural. What does that really mean? And a lot of times we can just see these words on a label and think, oh, great. I
Mm-hmm.
even saw recently on a food product, it said like bioengineered in a lab. It was like something that was like that overt, but with a really beautiful kind of farm-like landscape in the branding. So
Mm-hmm.
it like gave you this idea that it was made on a farm, but it actually said it was made in the lab. And so it just, we have to be aware of sometimes these messages that are meant to be really misleading. So there also could be irrelevant claims. Some companies might make the claim that their product is free from a particular chemical, but that chemical never would have been utilized in the creation of the product to begin with. So it's like, what does that even matter? Like when potato chips say that they're gluten free, it's like, well, all potato chips are gluten free. So
Potatoes don't have gluten in them.
yeah, that's great, but that doesn't set your particular potato chips apart.
Yeah.
And there can be some of these hidden trade-offs where companies may promote a product as environmentally friendly while ignoring maybe other negative impacts. They can have a higher carbon footprint in the manufacturing process. So I think some of this related to this question is being aware of, even if we have our sights on shopping sustainably, making sure that we are actually buying from the companies who aren't greenwashing their products, making us believe that we're paying more money for something that is more environmentally friendly when really it's not at all. And so some of the ways that we can do that is by buying locally, by understanding a little bit more about who we're purchasing from, just doing that little bit of extra research. But for your question specifically about the sheets, yeah, if you truly bought 100% cotton, that is one of the most sustainable types of textiles when it comes to sheets. 100% cotton is grown without pesticides, synthetic fertilizers. It doesn't have GMOs. It's more biodegradable than some of these alternatives. But we want to look for 100% cotton, not some of these other like polyester fillers.
And I think you can get away with just going 100% cotton. And then you're also avoiding some of the microplastics of polyester. So ultimately, we do the big things most of the time. So the few times that we do have to go with the cheaper option that's less sustainable, it makes less of an impact. We are never going to be perfect. So the 100% cotton sheets, for example, are a great purchase. Ultimately, we want to find free, borrow, buy secondhand. You could have bought secondhand sheets, which would have also been great. I think most of the secondhand sheets are going to be probably made of polyester. So if you want to avoid the plastics just for health reasons, again, going with the 100% cotton new sheets is a great option. But we want to do those 80% of the time. So the 20% of the time when we do have to choose the less sustainable option, it's okay. Like, you don't have to feel guilt about it for spending a little extra money to spend in alignment with your values. But I think that those things, that 80% of the time, those are the most sustainable things that, you can't greenwash a thrift store unless you're Goodwill and you're selling brand new, like, crappy items at Goodwill.
Yeah.
Goodwill somehow can greenwash sustainability.
They're doing it.
They're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I still will shop truly secondhand stuff from Goodwill, but nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to give ourselves as many options, especially it's getting easier to have more sustainable options as a frugal person, but we're not 100% there yet.
Mm-hmm. And beyond just buying less plastics or buying the most environmentally friendly product, we also want to be aware of where we're banking. A lot of big banks will invest in industries whose practices we may not agree with. And so really doing some research on where is my money going when I'm investing or banking with these certain larger banks, and making some more informed decisions about how you can kind of vote with your dollar by who you bank with. We've got a really great video that kind of explains this, also linked in the show notes.
And it might be right there if we figure out how to do it.
We're going to point, but there might not be nothing. We're new to this, okay?